Welcome to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. Now let's talk Perth. Perth property has been one of the hottest markets in Australia, but is the boom already over, or is there still time to jump in? In this episode of Geared for Growth, I sit down with Jarrad Mahon, property investor, buyer's agent and founder of Investor's Edge. From starting out as a young engineer with a big dream to building one of Perth's most respected property management agencies, Jarrad shares his journey and blueprint for long-term investing success. Jarrad shares everything from how Perth is evolving beyond mining to avoiding costly investor mistakes and the power of a strategic portfolio plan. If you're wondering whether Perth still has some room to move or you want to learn how to invest strategically for the long haul, you don't want to miss this conversation. Here's Jarrad. Jarrad Mahon, thanks for joining me on Geared for Growth.
No worries, Mike. Happy to be here.
I wonder, in some respects, if we're a little bit late to the party because you are a buyer's agent based in Perth. I mean, you do other things. I don't want to just throw you out there as a buyer's agent, but buyer's agent in Perth, it's 2025. I mean, why weren't we talking in 2021?
Well, we could have done, but I think some of the insights today will show people that it's not necessarily too late, depending on what sort of property you're looking to add to your portfolio.
Yeah, no, that's good, and I think it's a very reasonable question. I mean, are we past the peak? I mean, according to core logic, it's month after month, peak. The pace of growth is coming down, but it's still robust and it's still got legs. So I definitely want to unpack some of that with you. But let's just start with you. Let's get a bit of an insight into the man, Jarrad himself. You started out as an electrical engineer. What was the journey from there into sales and property management and the buyer's agency, as I mentioned?
Well, when I was 16, like many investors, I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And there wasn't, a lot of investing books and materials around back then. So when I read that, it really sparked my whole curiosity, and it showed me that you didn't have to come from a background of wealth or be highly educated, or I felt like it was possible for me and anyone to go and create wealth if they had a strong enough drive. So from that point onwards, I really was looking for my path and how to go about creating wealth. And by the time I became an engineer, I had my whole sort of plan set where I wrote a little business plan and took it around to my next door neighbours at the time. And it was to buy a property and renovate it and sell the property and give them back their money that they'd put in and give them a 50% split in the profit. Mm-hmm. And one of my next door neighbours said, "Yeah, I'm happy to back you on that, Jarrad. It's a great little plan that you've got there." And my parents very quickly were like, "What the hell have you written into this document? Let me see it. The neighbour wants to give you 150,000. What have you exactly put in there?" And they didn't realise like how serious and focused on investing and all the learning that I'd done over those sort of 4 or 5 years from when I was 16. And they ended up reading that business plan and they'd never done any investing themselves at that point, and said, "Hey, Jarrad, we'd like to back you and go and be your partner instead of the next door neighbour." So that's how I got my start, by partnering with my parents, and it was a great family sort of project to find that. I dropped my brother off in a suburb that I could afford. It was just purely based where I could afford to buy, which back in those days it wasn't much. Yep. And dropped my brother off on his push bike and had him target any property that looked run down and in need of a renovation with a simple little flyer saying, "I buy houses, ready to go. Avoid paying agents and get in touch." And that's how I got my first purchase. And I paid him sort of $5 an hour or $10 an hour to cycle around and drop as many of those off as he could find. So it was a fun beginning, but I quickly learned that adding value and renovating isn't what it appears to be in the on the block show. And when you're having to make work all this out yourself and sleeping on the floor some weekends just so you can save on your travel time to get there, and I learned a lot of things that I don't want to do, as much as we still did add a lot of value to that house, and made a good profit. So that certainly got me excited as to the opportunity and the possibility that property investing had. And I was looking at my annual income as being an engineer, and I just thought, after I'd done a few of these, small little projects, I thought, well, if I'd had all my time to devote to this, what could I achieve? And I took that sort of brave leap of faith to take a year off from engineering and see if I could make a go at it. And I was struggling at the time with I had 4 properties, and the property management on them was really poor, and I had vacancy, and I had tenants damaging a property, and I had property managers that weren't contacting me back. So it was just very frustrating. At one stage, I nearly sold all those 4 properties and was going to just get out because of how difficult it was, a holding of a property. I was thinking I'll just turn over properties and make an income from adding value and getting out. But I had a fellow investor that said to me, Jarrad, if you can't find a property manager, why don't we start a property management focused real estate agency and do it with an investment mindset? And I was like, what do you mean? I don't want to be a real estate agent. I don't want to be a property manager. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. And that's how Investors Edge was born, by filling that need in the gap in the market that we couldn't find from anyone else. So that's how it all came about.
It's a wonderful origin story, and obviously you were just hell-bent on making a success of it and passionate. And I think so many businesses start because people have a terrible service within a certain industry, and like, if it's that bad, then I'm going to make a killing just by answering the phone or calling people back or doing what I say.
Basic things.
Yeah, it's funny. All right, let's talk about Perth. We sort of prefaced it in the beginning. It's had a hell of a run, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there was a lot of commentators talking about Perth is too focused on resources and it's risky. It's a little bit like gambling. It doesn't have the employment diversity. It has good incomes, but that can be really feast and famine. No matter what anyone says, you cannot argue with the performance of Perth. Basically the number one growth market that we've seen probably for quite some time. It does kind of beg the question, whilst the pace of growth is coming down, we are still at the peak of the market. It is still posting growth. It is still robust. What are your expectations for it to have a second wind, or is it just a matter of it might be a perennial performer for a point, and then it kind of begs the question, will it have that 10 or 14 year period where it's flat that we did see in evidence prior to the boom that had people a little bit nervous about it as a long-term play?
Yeah, well, any investor that's been in Perth for more than 5 years does have a bit of a sour taste in their mouth from the period of 2016 to 19. And a lot of our clients have stuck with us across that whole journey. And I've seen, the highs and I've seen the lows. And that was a once in a lifetime situation where we had the largest amount of mining projects in their construction phase that we'd ever had in our state. And it can't be underestimated just how many jobs and overall employment that created. But the cliff was always going to come where these projects move from construction phase into production phase. Mm-hmm. So we're now in a market where our majority of our economy has transitioned to this production phase, and by its very nature, it's a lot more stable. There's agreements for our resources that extend, long term into the future. Short term fluctuations in iron ore prices or different resource prices really don't have any bearing on the majority of these contracts, and because we're in production phase, the actual jobs required tends to go up, slowly, and a lot more stable over time. Think about a mine site that needs more maintenance, that needs more, it requires a steady, slow increase of jobs just to maintain that asset, and so that's what is underpinning our economy now. A lot more stable, long term production type of uh, focus, and um, I I've spoken to a lot of key experts that confirm this, and it's going to mean that we're going to follow um, a lot similar cycle of growth to the other states of Australia, where you know nothing can boom forever,
Yeah.
and anyone that says otherwise, I would be turned. They're full of it. Let's just say,
Yep.
and we saw earlier this year Perth start to pause and really take a breath because think about breathing. You can't just continually breathe out. We had our state election as well as the federal election, and it did seem that affordability was starting to bite, as it was everywhere
Mm.
across Australia before we started to get these interest rate reductions. So that had started to really put a pause on things, but since having three interest rate reductions, since having the confidence restored of both election outcomes being out of the way, we've definitely entered a second phase. And if anyone's unsure about that, you only need to look at the total number of properties listed for sale, and it's now this week hit the lowest number ever in the history of WA, which is
Wow.
low 2,300 properties for sale, which is just absolute insanity of tightness. So we've got record prices getting set every weekend at the moment, where you know people are paying anywhere from 20 to 30k above. We sell properties here at Investors Edge as well, and do it strategically for investors. And I got my record price over asking price the other week, 160,000 over asking price for a 600k property.
Gosh.
So the what investors do need to realize is you don't want to get caught up in the fever of the market again, and you want to do it a lot more strategically. Like previously, 5 years ago, let's face it, you could have thrown darts at a board and done very, very well with
Mm.
almost buying anything across Perth anywhere.
Yes.
So now you really need to use an evidence-based, data-driven, analytical approach. Combine that with local knowledge to look at where is most undervalued and where is still, primed for the most growth. Not just in the short term, because probably any buyer's agent can go and buy wherever is hottest and get 6 or 12 months of growth. But my memory is very fresh to when things weren't as hot, and we had to, go and lease a property and still lease it quickly to quality tenants when the market was down. So you don't want to compromise on the actual asset that you're buying. And also for many investors across that 2016 to 19 period, you know, many of them didn't have good uh, buffers, and they stretched themselves too far, and then they ended up needing to sell at the worst possible time. And if you had a subpar asset during that time and you had to sell it, uh, when the market's cool and it's not there, an inferior asset will really get hurt when you come to sell as well, because people will buy on a busy road at the moment, and you'll have probably 5 offers for it. In a cold market, you'll have to keep slashing the price until you can find one offer,
Mm.
and so that's very fresh with me. So you don't want to compromise and get caught up in emotions just to get into a property, and you need to think about the medium to long term as well.
That's a good point. And it makes me want to ask the question about this sort of horde of the digital investors that came into Perth. I think in our own data, we saw the distance between where people live and where they invest blow out to 2,000 kilometres, which really tells the story about East Coast property investors. And I suppose, as you say, you could have thrown a dart at a map at any suburb and really any property in Perth in 2021, and you would have had some success. But I kind of equate that to gambling, right? If you go into a casino and you're like, I've got $100 for a night out and you're up to 500, you don't look at that as real money, right? You're like, oh, I only came in with 100, but you can technically cash that out and go on your merry way. What I'm sort of getting at there is that, okay, maybe you overpaid in 2021 and you will still sell it for a profit, but the profit that you could have made could be an extra $50,000 or $100,000. Just because you're still doing a profit doesn't mean that money isn't it's not meaningful. And when you're sort of talking about this property that you sold, 100K plus over, I'm wondering, is that a fairly good way to categorize some of the investors that came into Perth and just were desperate not to miss out and overpaid? I'm interested in your insights there. The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Well, with this digital investor horde that I see, I think many of them do just have the intention of getting in and getting out. And if they're buying a subpar asset, that can be very risky because you don't know exactly when the market's going to turn. And even though we use data, I always think it's better to focus on buying something for the long term. And the other crazy thing is that I've done a very interesting study on by the time you add up the entry costs, the exit costs, and all the taxes that you pay, if we compare that to, let's say, buying a property and achieving a pretty average return over the long term of 5% average annual growth rate over the long term, not shooting the lights out, but most of us could buy a fairly average property without too much skill. When I compare the return that we'd need to achieve if we try to get in and out of cycles and change in and out of properties, let's say we did that every 4 years, and it'd be very difficult still to come in and get that timing right, and not to mention the hassle of needing to research a new market and needing to build your team there, and you need to find a property manager, find a buyer's agent if you're using one, find your building inspector, conveyancer, all the rest of it. Lots of effort, and feels like you're being really busy and productive. And I only know this because I've made these mistakes in the past too, Mike. Yeah. So when it comes to the actual return you'd need to achieve on average per year, you'd need a 13% return on that property just to offset the entry, exit, and tax, and that's at a 30% marginal rate. It'd be even higher return that you'd need to offset a higher taxable income. So that's like a 2.5 times return. You would need to shoot the lights out to achieve that on average over a 4-year period. The actual skill you'd need as an investor to achieve that would be super high, and you'd have to then try and do it consistently every 4-year period. So I think it comes back to strategy and what are you trying to achieve. And just because you think you're being productive and you think that you're smart by selling in and selling out, it doesn't always make sense, especially when you look at the numbers and you look at the effort involved. So I'd just question, what sort of plan. It comes back to what sort of plan and strategy these investors have. Do they really appreciate the risk that they're taking? And I've seen firsthand there's pros and cons to having investors swoop in, right? Like we need investors to provide rental accommodation,
Yeah.
and that's been a much welcome boost to, things were so tight here in Perth with our crazy high population growth, both from interstate migrants and overseas, and that's still continued even at this point. We've got the highest online search results from interstate, looking at Perth compared to any other states, set up at the moment, and that's to current data showing that we've still got that crown of people looking to migrate or looking to buy interstate to here. When I consider, it's been great that we've got those extra rental properties for that increasing population, because people usually rent first before they come and buy, and
Yep.
we've needed them. But, what this digital herd is doing is also making the markets potentially a lot more volatile, where a lot of these other investors might be buying. So take certain suburbs of Perth where there's an over concentration of investor activity, and we'll see that we'd see this around the country too. Vacancy rates are actually quite high in those areas, and it's difficult to get a tenant because there is a bit of an oversupply of investors buying into there. Now, that's on the rental side. So imagine on the sale side, when these investors start exiting, it can drop a market quite rapidly like a rock.
Yeah.
And I expect that Darwin's going to fall prey to this type of, really volatile cyclical roller coaster, because investors are coming in there and they're pumping it up, and you don't want to be the last person standing when the music stops and everyone's dumping out. So that's what I'd just say to caution, playing that short-term game. And those of us that have been investing over the long term can see that you're better off making decisions for the short, medium, and long term. And the real wealth's created through compounding, not through, one-off cycles. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting insight. I suppose, like with Darwin, if it continues to grow in the pace that it's growing, the more likely it will be one of those markets that people are like, okay, I've got more than enough to cover my in and out transactional costs,
yeah,
and I'm nervous about the market and I'm out. So we may see, I mean, typically across all property in Australia, we've never seen a 10% downturn, right? We never see properties drop 10% if we look at, the history of the downturn cycles. Whereas, Perth could be one of those markets that has a 20% downturn, right? Especially if it grows 40% in 12 months, which some of the data is suggesting that it's not impossible. I want to take a slightly different direction and talk about like investing for you. I mean, you've given some good sort of insights about the way to do it is perhaps a little bit less exciting than people might like. It's often the shortcuts are at the butcher's shop, as a wise man once told me, and getting rich slow is really the safest way to do it. It's buying quality assets and being patient and doing value add as you can, and slowly chipping away and letting the power of compounding do its job. But you've sort of put together a bit of a wealth blueprint. I wouldn't mind you giving us a little bit of a 101 on what sort of quality investing looks to you for people that are wanting to set themselves up for financial freedom, aren't necessarily interested in the latest shiny market and having that high level of risk associated with their investing.
Yeah, well, I guess over the years, having now had my agency for 17 odd years, I've seen a lot of the mistakes that investors make, and hands up, I've made a lot of them myself too. So when I'm speaking about these things, no one can ever say that I'm not speaking from experience, Mike. so, so the biggest mistake I see people make first off is not having a clear plan. Like they're aimless with their investing. They're just following the latest fad, or they're just focusing on the next single investment in front of them. But by doing that, they're not working to an overall strategy and what's going to get them to their end goals. It's very just, I'll do what's in front of me. Gee, that seems to make money now. I'll do it now. But you can then compromise your next steps that you're going to take and really limit, the growth that you can have over the medium and longer term. And I did this a lot where, just what I was talking about then with not realizing the transaction costs from being really busy and feeling like I was getting ahead, but then looking back and thinking, gee, if I'd actually just bought a quality property and bought less of them, then I'd be in a hell of a lot better place by now instead of being a renovation and subdivision king that I can tell people at the barbecues how great I am.
Yeah.
I could have just been a passive buy and hold investor that could have still done a bit of cosmetic renovation to uplift things, but not paid anywhere near as much transactions and selling costs and tax along the way. So I think it comes back to having that clear, and we call it a strategic portfolio plan, and that's something that we do for people. And I used to, when I first started creating a plan, I would do it in a spreadsheet, or initially it was just really a bit of a written plan on paper. But the awesome thing of where technology's come is we can now model things out with using powerful software. And if one of my clients asks me, should I upgrade my home now or should I wait to upgrade it later? How are we going to use our investing to actually fund and provide for that lifestyle? And I think that's where our generation's a lot different. Whereas, the older generation would wait until they're 60 or 70 to retire, and they'd save all their eggs for that day that may never even come for some people. And I think our generation is much more about how can I use investing to improve and increase my lifestyle along the way. And that's why I think having a strategic plan that couples both the home and your investments and allows for your travel and your holidays and your car upgrades, because then I don't feel guilty about doing those things, because I used to feel like, it's taking away from my investing, and I wasn't clear, is there consequences to that longer term? Am I still going to get to my wealth goals? But now that when it's all part of the plan, we're upgrading our house now, our car this year, to do that, okay, we have to sell that investment property. It's one step back, but two steps forward. And so all of that can be done in a really strategic, optimum way. And whereas you're limiting what you sell and you're buying quality assets that you hold for the long term. And then when you actually see what compounding on a quality asset can do, God, it gets me pretty excited as a data nerd. So that's really the first step to me, where I think the majority of investors don't have, a dynamic plan that they update every year, that's, in software that takes into account their whole financial position and all their current properties and where they want to head to. And I think I'd love to see some data on this, or if we could ever get some data. But from my experience and all the clients we chat to, we manage for 1,000 odd clients, I reckon 5% or less have some kind of written, thought out, clear strategic plan. And I'm trying to change that within my clients, and they're probably they've been listening to me for 5 years, so I've probably got more people that do have a plan than the overall investor population. So
yeah, you'd hope so if they are listening to you and taking your advice, but they'll be better off for it, right? Because you talk about, like, I wish we had data on the percentage of people that have an actual plan. I think in some respects we do, when we see the percentage of people that own one property being like 72%. That kind of says to me that the typical investor doesn't have a plan, because I don't know that many property investors that have a goal to own one property. And of course, you could own one $10 million property and be fine. But the reality is likely that one property is not enough
No,
for what the original reason that you decided to invest in was to completely change your future in retirement,
yep,
or your ability to retire early, or just to be financially free. There's a
no,
pretty strong argument to say that one property might not be enough. It doesn't have to be 10 or 20 or
no.
50. It could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 6. But I think that is a bit of an evidence that
Yeah.
we look at the shiny thing first, and that's the property, rather than the plan, which is kind of the homework thing. Or I like to say, you can have your dessert, but you got to eat your veggies first, like mum and dad used to say. And I think the veggies are the plan. Before we let you go, I did want to kind of circle back on the property market at large. We talked about Perth. We're heading into more of a stable trajectory. I know that you don't just invest in Perth. I want to ask probably a two-parter. Are you still investing in Perth, and do you see the legs there? And where do you look in this great big brown land of ours for other opportunities?
Well, we're definitely still buying in Perth. I think it has to come back to your plan as well, and the type of asset that you want to next add to your portfolio and what that's going to give. So, um, when I'm considering where to buy for a client, it's also worth considering what sort of concentration of properties they have, and getting some diversity in your overall portfolio, I think, is a wonderful thing. And that's why I own properties in Brisbane, Perth, and Melbourne at the moment.
Yep.
And I've focused on the larger capitals. And for clients that are overly concentrated in Perth, we're buying properties in Melbourne selectively as well. But I think Perth represents good opportunities still over the next 1 to 2 years, and beyond that, I think we'll probably start to take a bit more of a pause and have more modest growth, and hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, with not having the big seesaw of going from construction to production as we had last time, hopefully we'll have more of a softer landing and go through more of the same sort of cycle that others have been. What's actually happening at the moment is that what's fueling that second wind is that the first home buyer market is stimulated out of control by all these government incentives, and our local government has changed the transfer duty threshold to 700,000. It used to be at 600,000, I believe, and so
Yep.
now anything with a 6 in the front of it is soon going to have a 7 in the front of it, price wise in Perth. And we've got the home buyers deposit scheme at the federal level that's come out, and they've got an 850 cap on their threshold for helping people into a property with 5% deposit and paying no lender's mortgage insurance. So that's also giving extra, stimulation up to that 850 sort of price point here in Perth. And then we've got everyone that has held a property at the lower end. Gee, they've in many cases had their property double in the last 5 years. So they're looking to use that equity to upgrade now into the middle suburbs. And then as the people are getting, as the demand's heading into that middle, they're getting record prices, and so they're upgrading into the top. And we're seeing it continue to ripple through the market. Whereas so that's what's really stimulating and taking us into this second phase, and it's been driven by first home buyers at the bottom, and not so. The first phase was mainly driven by investors at the bottom.
Yep.
So a different overall makeup, and there's a lot of opportunity to get in at the lower end still, and in the middle. And then for those investors that it really comes back to your plan and what you can afford quality wise. So I always think of buying the best quality of property that you can afford to hold over that longer term. So when I started out my investing, I was buying in the shittest suburb because that's what I could afford, and that's where I started. And these days, in my portfolio, the average price point is 1.5 mil, and I've got properties that are much higher price than that, that drag up that average. And so I'm really buying quality because I can afford to hold that. But if I didn't start out at the lower end, I wouldn't have gotten to where I am today either. So we help investors at all ends of that spectrum, and you've got to be a lot more selective now. Is really the message, and there is opportunity still.
Excellent. Well, it'd be really interesting to look at the price segmentation for transactions that happen in Perth, as we see, the bottom end is maybe had its time, and it's the upgraders that we'll see a little bit more happening. And as we sort of talked about on your show, which you were kind enough to invite me on, that would likely drag that median up if we're seeing much more activity in that middle and that higher price point. So be interesting to kind of see how that happens in the median sort of totality data, and contrast that with what's happening on the ground. But it's still very, very interesting market for investors. But of course, you've got to be careful and use an expert on the ground like yourself. So Jarrad, thanks for giving us the deep dive on Perth and what's happened, what's to come. And we look forward to touching base with you in a couple of years just to see what's happened on the other side.
No worries, Mike. Happy to be on the show, and as a long-term listener, it's a real honour, so thanks.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks, Jarrad.